Catus Maximus here, this time with a little video about this Harbor Freight Chief air cutoff tool. I guess it's not a grinder because it doesn't have a 1/4 inch collet. This is actually a Habitat for Humanity find, and it was like this, new in the box. I couldn't really believe it. I'm not exactly sure how this ends up, but it's not the first time that I've seen relatively modern products new, particularly at a place like Habitat for Humanity. It seems some people just figure either a tax write-off, or if they bought it for cash, or they're just beyond the return period, that they just decide they'll help out with trying to help people build houses. And I actually had a whole set of these cutoff wheels. I will end up keeping those. Actually, I'll keep both of this, but it was actually, no joke, real surprising. That's why I do like going by the junk stores. Obviously, it's not every day or every week or even every month something like this shows up. But, you know, a couple of 3 times a year, there's sometimes some really cool items. And this actually happens to be one of them. So I'm kind of stoked that I didn't have to go into Harbor Freight to pick up this item. I know, I rip on Harbor Freight a lot, but a lot of people shop there. A couple of basic wrenches, staple bag, and an Allen wrench. I guess the Allen wrench here is to, I guess, assist maybe if you've lost one of the normal wrenches, you can use an Allen wrench in the end there. So it has a composite guard. People complain that the guard is not adjustable, but I was thinking that it was because there is a spring here, and you just have to, and it's kind of a difficult proposition, but you can adjust the guard. You just have to pull it up. There's actually a little roll pin that sits in these little notches. So that's how you can adjust the angle of the guard. It is a composite guard, but it is pretty heavy duty. I guess one of the neat things about this is it has this collar, and this collar allows it to, it's a reversing, but it's not a drill. And you would say, well, why on earth does a cutoff tool have a reversing option? And it actually is pretty handy, because if you're doing some kind of cutoff operation where the only way you can position yourself in the tool, most times these things will end up spinning, I guess, clockwise. When you look at the blade, they'll sit clockwise. But you may end up in a situation where it's throwing the sparks either in your face or against something that may be potentially flammable. But you can actually reverse this so that the blade will turn the opposite direction. It's actually a neat option for a cutoff tool, because if you're using it to, say, cut off exhaust or a variety of applications where you would be using a small cutoff tool like this, it's really nice to be able to, once again, reverse the direction so that you can have the sparks going where you want them to. It does have a pretty big body, so if you're not going to get too up flush against something. That's why I was never too fond of these cutters, and actually I've never owned an air version. I have an electric version, but these air versions tend to have pretty big bodies, and so their usefulness is there, but they're not as useful as what you would think, and not for the $75. It does have a metal switch or a metal trigger handle with a easy to use lock out there. Other than that, rear exhaust, not a whole lot to say. They say 4.6 CFM, so really would be 5 CFM at 90 PSI. And I don't have a compressor that's anywhere close to being able to run these. That's the one thing, is these types of tools. I've read not just reviews of this, but a lot of higher end cutoff tools. And that's a big, you get this inevitable collection of people who complain about performance, and I think that's really related to the air volume. Air tools really need a lot of air and a surprisingly large compressors, particularly something like this. Air tools are great for they have less moving parts, there's nothing electrical associated with them, they have lots of power. The big caveat is the darn air compressor. And a lot of times, once again, you need a pretty big air compressor, and they're horribly inefficient. Something like 30% of the electricity that gets pulled out of the wall by your compressor actually makes it to spindle power on your air tool or your air impact wrench. Even old brush corded electric tools are like 80-85% efficient. So something like this, to get 100 watts equivalent of spindle horsepower, you need to pull 300 watts on the wall via the air compressor. That's neither really here nor there. As far as this new Harbor Freight's nice Chief design brand, they are nice. It is a pretty decent tool. I don't mind the composite guard, and it should be more resilient to getting dinged up if it's dropped than a metal one. I just hope it's plenty temperature resistant, because obviously this is going to get a lot of hot sparks. What really would concern me maybe more, not so much with steel sparks, but if you're doing something like cutting off titanium or something that has really hot sparks, that could potentially be a little bit of a concern. But once again, I haven't tested it for that. And once again, I do like the fact that you can adjust the guard. It is a little bit difficult to adjust, and I suspect once this gets used and there's a bunch of grit in there, this is going to get harder to pull and turn. But at least they did include the feature, I should say, initially. It does feel pretty substantial. It is pretty heavy. Once again, not a lot else to say about it, but I did want to make a little video. There's definitely a few videos where people do certainly test the performance. I guess the one thing that also mentions, it does include a blade, but apparently it's inferior to the actual Chief brand cutoff blades. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.